Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this Wednesday's edition of Southbridge Street Live. I am with my dear friend, fellow columnist. This is Adam Mahon, and Victoria in Motion just came out with its spring edition, and look at that, you're in here. That's so crazy. All right, so Terror from the Trees. Tell me a little bit, Adam, about yourself, your love of history, and why you choose to write about it.
So, from Victoria, born and raised.
Native?
Families from Victoria, born and raised. So we go back several generations. Just as I've grown up and, through school or whatever, just slowly, the passion for history, family history, genealogy, whatever, regional history, just all the fun stuff has just become an ever-growing passion. And so that, of course, culminates into what I write for the magazine.
Now, the reason why I asked Adam to be here is because Adam also does something that I find fascinating, which is he writes publications for families in Victoria who are interested in their genealogy. And so he'll sit with community members and get some baseline information and do the research.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's fascinating. So it's not really like ghostwriting, but you end up with whoever hires you ends up with basically their genealogy.
Yeah, so it mostly started as just a hobby. It was something that I did for myself, just following stories. And I'll give a brief example. I traced our lineage back and found that we had an ancestor that was from Luxembourg who came to Texas in like 1830 something or another. Turns out he was born in Luxembourg in like 1817. So I was like, okay, that's kind of fascinating. What was Luxembourg like in 1817? So of course his parents, being also my great-grandparents, were born in France, Germany respectively, and lived through Napoleon.
Right.
And so that it takes, we all hear about Napoleon and the French Revolution, and it seems like an abstract thing that happened over there, but then to find I had, ties to that time in history. And so it just makes things like that feel more alive, feel more a little bit more kind of close to home, as it were.
Right.
And so just finding those little tales and connections in the family history is just, it kind of adds that fun factor.
For sure.
And so just to be able to, like I said, I've had friends in the past that knew that I did it and said, hey, I don't know who my grandparents were. And, I taken a lot of time to do that for my girlfriend and spending time finding stuff on her family that she didn't know and her grandparents didn't really know either. And so it just kind of blossomed from there. And I've had a few people that, wanted some mini biographies written up. And so that was just a fun way to kind of use that hobby.
Right, to study their lineage.
Yeah.
I mean, didn't you do one recently about they were actually on the, not the Mayflower, but they were...
Yeah, and so that was...
They were part of the Mayflower fleet.
Part of the Mayflower fleet.
Which is so cool.
One of the descendants, came to Texas during the Republic.
Wow.
That was a really fun project to be able to do some external research and find more of what was happening than even, the person that asked me to do it kind of knew either. Just there was just so much more that you can uncover and unravel that just makes it exciting and fun.
So one thing that I feel like, and maybe I'm overgeneralizing, is that I seem to feel that people usually become interested in their lineage and interested in history later in life versus when they're younger. That that history classes or whatever are kind of a drag unless you're really into it.
Yeah.
So I know you were saying you were really into it as a kid.
As a kid, I mean, I loved history. The family history is one of those things I wish if I could go back in a time machine and appreciate more, especially on my mom's side. She lost a lot of her uncles and aunts really early. And so I think even on her dad's side, there's no one living. And so for me now, to want to go back and try and kind of uncover some mysteries, it's kind of lost to time.
Right.
And, looking on like her mom's side, I'm probably going a little too much on myself, but whatever. On my mom's side, she has one last living, relative that was her aunt.
Right.
And so been really being more diligent
Right.
at, take advantage of the time we have with her now to, find out about her past and
Right.
what it was like for her growing up.
Yeah, no, I totally get that because my grandparents were late immigrants from Switzerland. So my dad was born in Switzerland. Well, I spent every summer of my youth basically in New York in the Catskills with my grandma, and I never bothered to ask her much about Switzerland. Well, now I'm fascinated by it, and I just wish, I wouldn't have spent, you know what I'm saying, so much time letting her help me cut paper dolls, and instead have said, okay, how fascinating that you know both languages. She knows German and she knows French. But at the time too, we were told, that it was English, you just speak English or whatever. So we lost kind of that too. Yeah. But I'm really excited because we're going to go to Switzerland. But it would have been so amazing to know kind of more about what this culture was like and what her history was like. So I found out some fun things about like their my grandma and grandpa's relationship. Like he was a traveling actor, and my grandma was a little bit older. And I'm like, okay, I totally can see. Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. But going back to my to my question, which is how impactful and meaningful would it be for children when they are reading about the Mayflower, right? To know that their great grandparents, great grandparents, right?
It's far back.
It's far back. We're actually on one of those boats. Suddenly brings that story, like you said, to life. Right. So, do you have advice for us, for people who are interested in learning about their genealogy? So that we can...
Advice,
Where do you start when you start doing your...
So I've started just with the whole Ancestry.com,
right?
And I kind of use that as a jumping off point. It's, of course, it can be extremely unreliable, and that's where, for me, doing a lot of my family research, which again, a lot of it, we go back Texas multiple generations, so I really try and take advantage of the libraries. Mostly, the Victoria Public Library has that genealogical section, and there'd be days I'd spend all day in there just going through those old census books or going through, old newspaper rolls. I took a day trip to Gonzales because, we had, a distant grandfather that, lived in Leesville, Nixon area, and so I wanted to run over to Gonzales and see what I could find at that library. I'm trying to plan a trip to get down to Brownsville because I've got, a lineage connection down there. And so the libraries for me have been very, very beneficial. And like I said, the Ancestry is a jumping off point. It's a way to build the tree, as it were. But,
Do you feel like it's accurate? Ancestry.com?
You can go down some avenues.
Some rabbit holes.
You can go down some rabbit holes, and if you're not careful, the King of England was my, distant grandfather. It's very easy to fall into rabbit holes like that if you're not careful and you don't know how to actually verify your lineage and accept a dead end when you reach a dead end.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting to accept it.
And that's something I kind of battle with, going back to my mom's father's side.
Right.
I can only go back 2 or 3 generations before I feel like I'm cut off. And as much as I want to chase that or chase this lead, trying to read 18th century Spanish in cursive, it's just not going to happen. Yeah.
Right.
But the libraries, the UHV library here has
you are a student, right?
I am. Got
UHV?
one more semester.
Wow, that's awesome. All right, so what are you majoring in?
English and history.
English and history.
Why wouldn't I, right?
So shocking. So what are you going to do? What are you going to do when you grow up?
When I grow up, just continue finding the ways to write. I like following these paths, and I think the
Terror from the Trees.
Terror from the Trees is just one of those.
What did you find appealing about this story?
Terror
from the Trees, because even the title, I was like, oh Lord.
Even so, following that line of thought on just uncovering these stories and finding connections to them. The Comanche raid on Linville kind of kept coming up in research I'd do on my own, story, books on Texas history I'd read on my own, and then of course being a history student here at UHV, a few of the courses I've taken, this came up there as well, and so it was just one of those things that I found very interesting, that this was one of the first and major challenges that Victoria faced, was this unexpected, random pillage, and not even random. And so I think the thing about what makes a good story is that it's never one-sided, right? It wasn't just this random horde of wild, Comanche. There was a reason why they were upset and why they decided to take their frustrations out specifically on the Port of Linville, and Victoria just happened to be in the way and and suffered from it as well. So just following that, and I felt, deadline's coming up. I got to write something for Victoria in Motion. I know, we just read about this again, so, but I felt like it'd be a fun.
Thanks for your candor.
Yeah.
Cheryl's probably watching. She's going to be like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah, and then that's
how close were you to deadline before you started writing?
Actually, a month, remember?
Yes, I remember.
I was a month away from deadline.
There you go. You did a good job.
And so, just felt like this would be a fun way to tell that story, and this happened here. And
right. So I got a quirky question for you.
I'll try to have a quirky answer.
Okay, time machine. You can go back in time. You cannot go forward.
All right. I don't know.
You can go back in time and be present during a historical moment, or just a time.
A time and era, absolutely. 9th century Mesoamerica.
You're going to have to give me some description. You got to tell 9th century
Mesoamerica.
Okay.
So
talk to me about this.
Us growing up, just all of us, right? Growing up in Western society, we going back to ancient Greece, right? I mean, we all know the story of Odysseus and Achilles, right? Pretty sure everyone listening right now knows the name Herodotus or Plato, and we know all these people. We know everyone through the Middle Ages, people who lived across the Great Sea. But what about where we live now?
Oh, that's fascinating.
What about all those stories? And it's unfortunate that a lot of that was destroyed in flames, 600 years ago, and so much of it was lost. But thanks, of course, to modern technology and science, we're able to do what we can to recreate some of that.
So what was it like?
And that's one of the fun history avenues I'm currently on right now, is really kind of trying to immerse myself in what that was like. But you're talking about peoples and civilizations that were very connected through politics, through trade, through culture. They had, long traditions of astronomy and science and philosophy. And, one of the questions I have is, okay, we know who our philosophical idols were, right? We all know of Socrates and Plato. Well, who were the Socrates and Platos of, the Aztec or the Incan civilizations? Who were the great war heroes like Achilles and Odysseus? What were those myths that went back to their ancient times? Who was their great mathematicians? We know Isaac Newton. We know Pythagoras. Who were the Newtons and Pythagoreans of ancient Toltec society?
Hey, I have a question for you. This is so off topic. Did you read American Gods?
I'm halfway through it.
What do you think about that?
Do I want to go into booklet review right now?
The concept, I think, is interesting.
I had to stop.
Really?
I had to stop. Nothing against Neil Gaiman. I think Neil Gaiman is a beautiful writer.
Right.
I love his prose. He is an amazing author.
Agreed.
Wonderful. The story for me was too
See, I thought it was clever. I thought it was interesting.
There was a level of cleverness, and I like what it was he's trying to do.
Right. Well, now he's rolling in it because that show is. I've seen 3 episodes now of American Gods. Have you seen it?
No.
Well, you know, the cinematography is freaking amazing, so it's interesting. So
I need to. I've heard great things about it.
You kind of forgive the
quirkiness
of it, like, you know, that there's a god named town and a god named, you know, city, and there's a god named modern and
I don't know,
whatever. But the
I think also the reason I stopped where I did is because it just seemed to drag on. Like I was just kind of like, can something happen already?
But it does kind of make, going back to this, it just kind of reminded me that we do have gods, like that we traveled from all of these continents here to America, and we brought those myths and you know, and legends and things like that with us.
And a lot of that, you know,
how time has passed, those gods have, you know, gone away and given to more modern idols. I just found that part fascinating.
And that's the interesting part about just the human story in and of itself. Right. I mean, even, you know, if we look at the Toltec society, the 9th century, you know, Mesoamerica that I want to go back to. I mean, even that was the result of the coming together.
What are they wearing in the 9th century? What is it? What did you find so fascinating about it?
Just to see what it was like, because it's such a forgotten episode of the human story.
Right.
You know, what was it like? Did the people in Middle Mexico, how familiar were they with the people living in South America? How familiar were they with the people living in the Mississippi River cultures? I mean, there were trade networks. And so how did they interact with the people that they knew they shared a continent with? And how did, you know, ideas, whether it be of politics, religion, culture, art, philosophy,
economics,
how did that play? You know, because even, you know, just like, you know, we'll, you know, pick on, you know, England, right? England was never an autonomous, they were just their own thing and excluded the outside world. I mean, even modern England was the result of Viking, Roman, Germanic people just kind of all coming together, and you get this end product, which is nothing that was what was before. That, of course, happened here. It happens everywhere. That's just kind of how societies and civilizations operate. So it'd be interesting to see what was that like. Who were those heroes? Who were those villains? Who were the people that here's so-and-so's proof, or here was so-and-so's philosophy, and here was so-and-so's competing philosophy.
Right.
That, I think, would be incredibly fascinating.
Is there anything about Victoria, Texas that you've researched that most people don't know? I mean, how are we on, because I view Victoria as a fully researched community, that history is very important in Victoria,
Absolutely.
Texas.
But, and even me, I'm learning more and more. You know, there's, you know, friends that I talk to with about regional history who are much more knowledgeable on it than I am. So in no way am I trying to say I'm an expert on Victoria history, because even I'm still learning. And so, yeah, there are things that even I wasn't aware of, you know, just like I was talking to a buddy yesterday about the, was it Market Square? Memorial Square, Memorial Park.
Wow.
And right now it's just this vacant lot, but that was Victoria's first cemetery.
Oh, wow.
And there were, you know, it has stories connected to it.
Right.
That, I mean, there are markers and plaques on this just empty city block that you would drive past and not give, you know, a moment's thought about, but some really fascinating things happen there. Or, so another plug about me, I am also a recent member of the Victoria County Historical Commission. And so, you know, one of the things that was recently accomplished, we got a new historical marker for Camp Victoria, which is, again, something we drive by on 87, you see the marker, you can pull over and read it, but to know the story of what happened there and why it's so important is just kind of fascinating. Man, if I can try my best to remember. Some time has passed since I heard the story. It was, at the time, Victoria was pretty much vacant. It had been abandoned during the Texas Revolution. And as the Mexican forces were retreating south, the Texan army, which at the time was pretty small in comparison, had camped up near Spring Creek. And part of the reason they did that is they weren't about to go into Victoria and start occupying vacant homes, so they opted to occupy up there, and that was kind of a rallying point for more volunteers from across the United States to meet up and counter the threat of a potential reinvasion of Mexico, and that was just the rallying point. And if I remember correctly, feel free to correct me, anyone out there from that meeting on Monday that remembers this more than I do. But it was the site where the largest, the Texan army at its largest was mustered. And held,
that is fascinating.
Before they, realized that Mexico wasn't going to reinvade.
Wow,
So.
that's
And
incredible.
it's right there. You drive on your way out to Cuero and you can miss it.
Okay, I've got one last philosophical question for you.
Oh man.
Okay, ready? So, as time goes on, we learn more and more about the history that we have studied and we're taught in schools. History is always evolving, right, and changing. So, what is your thoughts on that?
So
On the things
I
that we
have
don't
I have
know.
my own kind of philosophy about
Sure.
history. Growing up, we're told countless times, if you don't understand history, you're doomed to repeat it. Blah blah blah. I don't necessarily hold to that paradigm.
Blah, blah, blah.
For me, history is important because if you don't understand the why we are here,
Right.
you'll never understand what this is. And I think it leads into ignorance to have ideas, opinions, perceptions of modern day,
Right.
of the current day, if you don't have an understanding of the events that led us here.
Sure, I agree.
And the events that led us here are infinite.
Right.
It's an infinite interlocking of causes and effects. And you could spend an infinite number of lifetimes following all those causes and effects.
Right.
But I think just knowing that we're here because we couldn't be any other way.
Right. Oh, that's really interesting. A great way to put it. So it is hard, though, like I said, for when you're talking to your kids to be like, so Columbus really didn't necessarily discover America.
Yeah, there are
It goes back.
fun ways you can.
And there's so many different sides to
Absolutely.
the Battle of the Alamo. And there's, these kinds of things, but it's just a great sort of general, outline. And to really encourage kids to say, like, okay, look, we keep saying this over and over and over again, but it is very, very important to know a little bit about where you came from.
Yeah.
And if you can instill that interest and curiosity in them.
And
there's
that's
a love of
important.
history.
And, we talk about that with the Historical Commission. We do have an, education committee, and that's, of course, the aim of the Education Committee is how do we impart these stories. I mean, the Historical Commission, sorry if I'm plugging it too much right now.
You're fine. You're good. You get
But, the Historical Commission has just a wealth
right.
of knowledge and information and stories.
Where do you find the Historical Commission here? Just Google it?
You can Google it. We have meetings the first Monday of every other month. So we just had our meeting for May this past Monday. So we'll
So it'll be in July.
convene again the first Monday in July. Those meetings are open to the public.
Very cool.
We usually will have, a speaker presentation. This past Monday was about Civil War veterans of Victoria County and just their stories. And Jeff Wright had some amazing maps that we got to look at.
Yeah, he's got cool stuff.
And yeah, that was a treat. So a lot of you, I'm sorry, but you missed out because it was awesome.
Yeah.
But yeah, so going back to the educational side of it is just finding ways to share those stories, which can hopefully, instill some type of passion and the youth for appreciating the community we live in, which I know is hard. If I would look back when I was 10, I still wouldn't care about history. There were still some Power Ranger toys that I needed to collect, and that was more important.
Right, I gotcha, I understand.
It's probably still important.
But here you are now.
'Cause I never got the blue one.
Do you want to plug for the blue one?
If anyone can
Adam
find
needs the blue Power Ranger.
But it was the Power Ranger where you hit the chest and like the head flipped, and then it was the mask, and then you hit it again, and then it was Billy. You know what I'm talking about. Don't judge me.
I don't, you know what? Hey, Power Rangers was not my thing, but I get it. But I understand. Well, Adam, this has been so fun to just kind of come and hang out with you. And,
Thank you.
You know, I'd love for you to, you know, feel free to come back and talk to us about, you know, things that you've learned about in Victoria. We can maybe do like a little history segment or something. So this is Adam Mahon, and this is Terror from the Trees. I was going to hold that for you, but I'll shake your hand.
Again.
Victoria in Motion magazine, and that can be read online at victoriainmotion.com. So thank you, Adam, columnist of Victoria in Motion and genealogy reporter. So families who just don't have the time or just need some help, I think was what we're going with there. Yeah, and you would recommend starting at ancestry.com and then calling you when it gets very complicated.
Yeah, if you find that you have royalty lineage, you did it wrong.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Adam.
Thank you for the invite.
For joining us, and thank you guys so much for watching Victoria Motion. Shoot. Thank you so much for watching Southbridge Street Live.